Sam, I'm excited to have you back because we've talked with you a few times about these issues. You kind of channel insights and expertise in your role as a college professor, as an AEI scholar, and a contributor here at Sutherland Institute. And I really want to dive into a new report that you authored, a new Sutherland report that touches on an issue that I don't think gets talked about a whole lot. And it's this idea of understanding people who identify as having no religious affiliation, but they're not agnostic, they're not atheists, they're just kind of nothing in particular in the identification. So we're going to go through this new report. It's called Talking About Religion in a Secular Age, How Religious Nuns Perceive the Value of Religion. And for those who are listening, nuns meaning Nones, meaning none is their religious preference or affiliation, not religious nuns like NUN, just for folks listening only. Got to make that clarification. So, Sam, maybe to start us off, can you just give us some background? Like, what's the purpose of this survey? How is this survey and this report different from previous ways of addressing this issue? How does this help us think differently about studying the role of religion in modern life?
So it's hard to overstate how important this project was. And when we first started talking about it, I actually couldn't sleep. I was really very excited about it. And that's because if you look at religion, if you look at faith, if you look at how people identify over the years, something huge has happened. Decades ago, you would ask folks, what is your faith? And you might have some form of Protestantism, Judaism, LDS, Catholicism, and so on. And you'd have a small number of folks who would say they are none. And, we just sort of throw that away and say, okay, maybe that's 2 or 3% of the electorate, or eventually 5 or 10% of the electorate. When you ask folks about that today, depending on what survey you look at, it could be as high as 45% of the electorate saying that they are nothing. But what does that mean? And if you look at so much research, and this is certainly the case in the Jewish community, we will ask you, what type of Jew are you? And you might say you're conservative, Orthodox, but we also have fair numbers of folks who say they are just Jewish or they're nothing. What is really groundbreaking about this survey is that it not only asks, are you nothing, but it asks you to go a little deeper into that. So we now have a better understanding of this 30 or 40% of the electorate or the polity. Some of them are atheists. Some of them are agnostic, and they did a lot of work to get there, to define and explain their atheism and their agnosticism. At the same time, we have a very large number of folks in the survey who say they're none, but they're not atheist or agnostic. They're just nothing. And what we've learned from this is that these are folks who grew up with faith in some capacity. They may have, if you're Jewish, had a bar or bat mitzvah. You may have been consecrated into the church. What has happened now is that these are folks who have drifted. They don't reject faith in religion, but they simply say, I'm really not part of it. So I'm really nothing. Having a chance to jump into this is huge. And the reason, again, is because we've seen this very significant growth in folks who identify as nothing or nuns. And as a college professor, I deal with this all the time. When I wish my students a happy something or other, the number of students who look at me with just confusion it has been increasing year after year after year. And it's not, again, that they're avowed atheists or agnostics. They don't question God or reject God. They're just nothing, and it's not part of their lives. So to have a survey and a project that jumps into this, it's really very, very much a landmark or groundbreaking sort of project. What's also groundbreaking about it and important is that it's not just dipping sort of a stick into the electorate and looking at what was pulled out from the electorate, but we ask some questions of these so-called nuns to get a sense of how rigid are your views? What do you really think about faith? And we can jump into that in a little bit. But basically, when you talk to atheists, agnostics, and nuns, they often say they're very skeptical of religion. They reject it. They don't see it as valuable. What this survey did, when you provide folks who identify as nuns with new information about the role of religion, how important it is in terms of families and community, how important it is in dealing with things like healthcare, disaster relief, homelessness services, the attitudes change. And what's again really very important here is that when you point out to folks who say they've drifted and say, but religion's important in society because we have religious groups. They take care of housing. They take care of homelessness. They take care of providing basic goods and services. Those who have drifted soften their attitudes very, very quickly and realize there's real value here. And that is the other, I would say, second critical finding of the project, which is there's a very strong recognition now over the value of faith for those who are traditionally nuns.
But that's if they're exposed to factual information, right? So, kind of can you talk a little bit more about the way the survey approached this, sort of a pre and post intervention, where it's one thing to survey people just saying, hey, what do you think about this particular issue? And in this case, those who identify as nothing in particular with a religious affiliation, understanding what their views of religion are. And two, to ask them, well, what would change your mind if you heard different information? That's what seems really insightful to me. Is, can you talk a little bit more about kind of what's the baseline for someone who says, well, I identify as nothing in particular, and what does a person like that think about religion in public life at baseline? And then what would change their mind to view religion more positively?
Mhm. So that's really the key here. This is an experimental design. So we collect baseline information. We ask lots of folks what they think about the role of faith in society. We understand what their general backgrounds are. And we realize that there's incredible skepticism. There is incredible ignorance about the role of faith and faith-based institutions in society. We then were able to go back to these folks, in particular the ones who say they're nuns, whether they're atheists, agnostics, or something else altogether. We then present them with some new information. That's the treatment and that's the test. And when you present them with this new information and say, hey, there's a lot that we can do here and a lot of value that these institutions provide, what do you then think about the role of faith and faith-based institutions in society? And in many cases, we saw 20 to 30-point jumps of being open to faith-based institutions in society. So when you talk to atheists and agnostics, the numbers don't change all that much. These are folks who've done a lot of thinking. They've drifted, but we don't necessarily know how far they've drifted. They just have a very particular conception of faith. For those who say, I'm not really much of anything and you've drifted, when you reintroduce the potency of religious organizations and say, look, when people need help, when they need food, when they need shelter, when they need clothing, when they need medicine, faith-based organizations do that. The folks who have drifted will pause, reevaluate their perspective, and give you a stronger answer and say, well, maybe faith isn't for me. Maybe it's not something I am exposed to or see or value. But now that I see this data and that I see the role of various faith-based organizations, boy, maybe I've been a little too close-minded. Maybe I realize that there is real value here. And that's why this is so important. It changes the script for those of us who work in faith-based organizations and institutions to realizing that we need to change our messaging. We need to be very careful and very clear in explaining what we do, why what we do is of value, and why it helps so many people around the nation.
Sam, I want to read an excerpt from the report. It says, while 77% of nuns initially viewed religion as, quote, part of the problem, exposure to factual information about religion's civic contributions produced a 23 percentage point shift, with only 54% maintaining negative views post-intervention. This demonstrates that evidence-based communication can meaningfully influence perceptions even among skeptics. So kind of to drive home the point that you're saying, is that to say that folks who are agnostic or atheist about religion, that they've sort of already made up their mind about how they view religion in public life, whereas as the religious nuns, those who identify as nothing in particular, are they essentially more persuadable? And if so, why does that matter with sort of the different demographic shifts we're seeing in faith and public life?
Sure. They are more persuadable, and that's what the data does reveal. Now, we'll obviously need to do a lot more work on this area, but I spend a lot of time with various atheists and agnostics as a college professor. I see them all the time. And the reality is to get to those points, in many cases, they've already done some research. They've already spent some time doing some thinking. And in some regards, they've created their own communities around being atheist and agnostic. It takes some real work mentally and emotionally to reject the idea of God entirely, or to constantly question or be skeptical of the idea of God. More often than not, most Americans, again, simply drifted. And when I talk to students, and I see this again all the time in New York and again among my students, You have these folks who had something growing up, and again, it's just faded away. It's not that they conscientiously did this, it's that our institutions have declined, and maybe their families are not as connected as they may have been, or they've moved around. These folks have just atrophied. The understanding and appreciation of faith has really thinned out. So they don't reject God or communities of faith whatsoever. They just are not part of them. So that's the real difference here. You realize that they're persuadable and they're open to hearing data and evidence. That's very, very exciting because it means there's an opening there. It may be hard, for instance, to welcome an atheist or agnostic back into a church or into a synagogue. But when it comes to most Americans who just have drifted, it means there's an opening there and say, hey, you may not, want to join us in the synagogue over some form of religious practice, but please come here and have a dinner with us. Please come here and help deliver food around Thanksgiving or New Year's time. And that's a very, very attractive proposition. It means that there is a lot of room for persuasion, a lot of room for showing value, and a lot of room for showcasing the benefits of religious organizations outside of just prayer, theology, and scripture. And that's very, very exciting to me, and presents, I think, all denominations and all faiths with a very strong mandate that there is an opening and a possibility of still making real connections, which is something that many religious leaders and many professor types have thought have been closed. This survey, by really digging down on the nuns and realizing that the nuns are dynamic and it's not just atheists, agnostics, and people who reject faith entirely, it says there's a door now open. And my advice to all religious leaders and lay leaders in religious communities is to say there is a possibility here. Let's jump on that because people are hurting, people need help, people are drifting. We can still provide community and services regardless of whether or not you're in prayer and in religious services with us.
Sam, final question, and we just have 30 seconds or so left. But although I want to ask you, help our viewers understand why this matters. I mean, if someone out there is watching or listening to this, thinking like, well, who cares if there is a growing demographic that doesn't really feel strongly one way or another in terms of religion? If there's kind of a live and let live, like, is it a problem if religiosity is declining in society, or if this rise of the demographic religious nuns, so to speak? Help us understand from a societal perspective, do these shifts matter? And if they do, why? And then how does this survey data sort of give us a roadmap as far as what to do about these shifts?
That's really the most important question. And I think the reality is that we are in a loneliness crisis. We've talked about this on the show before. We have low levels of social capital in this country. People are feeling lonely, isolated. They do not feel that they have anywhere to turn to. Institutional trust is in constant decline. You have people who are basically unmoored. Yes, they have their cell phones, but this does not replace human interaction. You have people who may have contacts in social media networks, but these same people say they feel very alone. They have nowhere to turn to. They have no one to talk to. The greatest sort of institution or device we have to repair that is religion and faith, faith-based networks, faith-based communities. When we've surveyed folks who are active in their churches, synagogues, and what have you, we know that these are very engaged, fulfilled people. They do not register anywhere near the levels of feeling this isolated. Levels of suicide, sadly, I hate to talk about it, are much lower. Connectivity levels are much higher. As we have larger numbers of folks saying they are drifting, they are nothing in particular, we have greater amounts of loneliness and social anomie in our society. What this study does for practitioners, thinkers, academics, you name it, shows that there is possibility for movement and growth. And if we want to solve our loneliness crisis, if we want to connect with people, we know how to do it. We've known how to do this for years. Durkheim figured this out over a century ago in Elementary Forms of Religious Life. Religious life, whether it's spiritual, practical, i.e. you're praying, or just communal, matters. And this data is so critically important because it shows that those who have drifted, not necessarily atheists or agnostics, but those who are just really nothing, are still open to something. And the data is so strong and gives us a roadmap and says there is a path forward. There's a path to creating more meaning in life. There's a path to creating more connectivity in life. And Once I had got my hands on the data, just like I couldn't sleep when we first started talking about it, I couldn't sleep after going through the data, because the data shows that there's a very much open window, and there's a possibility for faith and religion to help society come together again, find more meaning, and for our American populace or polity to be far less lonely and to have far more meaning. And it showcases that when you talk about things in the right sort of way, people are open to it. It doesn't mean we'll bring everyone over. It doesn't mean that churches, synagogues, mosques, what have you, are going to be totally reinvigorated overnight, but it means that people are still persuadable. And that's a very, very nice finding in today's world of polarization.
Thanks for watching that clip of Defending Ideas. For the full conversation, click the link in the description, and make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your shows.